These weren't just Hollywood parties. They were something else entirely. What if some of the most exclusive celebrity gatherings weren't about fame, but control? Behind closed doors, guests arrived expecting glamour, but left questioning what they had just witnessed. Because some of these nights didn't end when the music stopped. They began. And the deeper you go into Hollywood's hidden social circles, the harder it becomes to tell where the party ends and the cult begins. 15. The Malibu Moon Circle Gatherings. It didn't feel like a party. It felt timed. Guests arrived just after sunset, guided down quiet Malibu paths lit only by small lanterns. No loud music, no crowd energy, just low voices and the sound of waves breaking in the distance. At first it looked harmless. Artists, actors, musicians sitting in a loose circle on the sand. Someone played soft instruments. Someone spoke about energy, alignment, rebirth. Then the structure revealed itself. Everyone faced inward, no one interrupted, and one person, always the same, guided the entire night. Here's the shift. What began as conversation slowly turned into repetition. Words echoed, phrases repeated. Guests were encouraged to release identity, then rebuild it together. Not alone, together. That's where it changed, because this wasn't just expression, it was synchronization. Some guests left early, laughing it off as strange. Others stayed longer than they expected. And those who stayed until the end described the same feeling. That they hadn't just attended something, they had been pulled into it. 14. The Laurel Canyon Inner Circles. At first, it looked like creativity at its peak. Late-night jam sessions. Her writers exchanging ideas. Musicians testing sounds that didn't exist yet. Laurel Canyon was alive, free, experimental, unpredictable. But inside certain homes, something else was happening. Smaller groups, invite only, doors closed, conversations changed. Here's where the pattern begins. The same people attended, the same ideas repeated, and slowly the environment shifted from collaboration to agreement. Not forced, guided. There was always someone at the center, not the loudest, not the most famous, but the one everyone listened to. And the message was consistent. Reality isn't fixed. Identity is fluid. Control belongs to those who understand it. At first it sounded philosophical. Then it became directional. Some artists began isolating themselves from outside influences. Others started mirroring the same language, the same beliefs, almost word for word. That's when outsiders noticed something strange. These weren't just creative circles anymore. They were closed systems. Because when ideas stop evolving and start repeating, that's no longer inspiration. That's conditioning. And in Laurel Canyon, some circles didn't just shape music, they shaped minds. 13. The Golden Dawn Revival Salons. It started with curiosity, old texts, forgotten symbols, hidden philosophies pulled from centuries-old traditions. In the hills above Hollywood, private salons invited artists to explore something deeper than fame, something older. At first, the gatherings felt intellectual. Guests debated meaning, consciousness, the idea that reality itself could be influenced through knowledge. Candles lit the room. Books lined the walls. It felt controlled, thoughtful. And you know what? Then the structure appeared. Discussions became guided. Symbols weren't just explained. They were practiced. Movements became deliberate. Words became scripted. And here's where it shifts. Participation wasn't passive anymore. Guests were asked to take part, not all at once, slowly. A gesture here, a phrase there, a shared moment that felt symbolic, but carried weight. Because repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity lowers resistance. Some attendees described it as immersive. Others said something more unsettling, that the line between observer and participant disappeared without warning. And once that line is gone, so is distance. These weren't just salons anymore. They were systems, layered, structured, hidden beneath the appearance of intellectual curiosity. Because the deeper you went, the less it felt like you were learning something new. And the more it felt like you were being brought into something that already existed, waiting. 12. The Hollywood Psychic Development Parties. It sounded harmless. Unlock your intuition, Expand your awareness. In a city built on perception, that message spread quickly. Small gatherings began appearing across Hollywood. Living rooms filled with actors, writers, performers, all curious about something just beyond reach. At first, it felt like a game. Reading energy, predicting thoughts, testing perception. Then came the structure. Certain participants were more advanced. Certain voices carried more authority. And slowly the room began to divide, not by status, but by belief. Here's the moment it changed. Guests were told their doubts were blocks, when their resistance was weakness. Their skepticism was the reason they hadn't unlocked their potential. And that reframes everything, because now questioning the system becomes proof that you need it. Some participants leaned in deeper. Others stepped back, unsettled by how quickly curiosity turned into hierarchy. Because this wasn't just exploration anymore. It was alignment. And once belief becomes the entry point, it doesn't take long before it becomes the requirement. 11. The actors' commune retreats. It was marketed as transformation, weekend retreats, deep emotional work, total immersion into character and self. For actors searching for authenticity, it sounded perfect. And at first it delivered. Isolation, no phones, no outside contact. Just a group of strangers pushed into vulnerability. Exercises began immediately. Me breaking down identity, releasing ego, rebuilding emotional response. Here's where the shift happens. The exercises didn't stop. They intensified. Sleep became irregular. Emotions stayed heightened. And one figure, always present, guided the process, deciding when to push, when to stop. Participants began depending on that voice, not for acting, for stability. That's when the environment changed from workshop to system. Because when you remove outside grounding and replace it with internal authority, you create dependence. Some actors describe breakthroughs. Others describe something else entirely. That they left feeling less like themselves and more like something that had been reshaped. And when transformation isn't controlled by you, it stops being growth and starts becoming influence. 110. The Silver Lake Energy Circles. At first it felt like connection, not networking, not performance, something quieter. In small homes around Silver Lake, groups gathered in dimly lit rooms, no cameras, no publicity, no industry talk. Just people sitting close, speaking softly about energy, alignment, and shared consciousness. It sounded abstract until it became structured. Here's where the shift begins. Participants were encouraged to mirror each other, breathing in sync, speaking in rhythm, repeating phrases designed to lock frequencies. It created something unusual, a sense of unity, but also loss of individuality. And that's the detail most people missed. Because when everyone begins to think the same way, respond the same way, even feel the same way, you stop questioning where those feelings are coming from. And one voice guided the sessions, calm, certain, always present. And slowly, that voice became the center of everything, not loudly, not forcefully, but consistently. Some attendees described the experience as peaceful. Others said something very different, that at a certain point, it no longer felt like they were expressing themselves. It felt like they were sinking into something already defined. And once you're synchronized, stepping out doesn't feel natural anymore. 9. The Hollywood Pyramid Group. It didn't look unusual at first, an exclusive mentorship circle, high-level networking, the kind of opportunity people in Hollywood chase for years. Entry was selective. Advancement was earned. That's what made it appealing. But beneath that structure was another one. Here's the pattern. Every member was placed within a tier. Not publicly, but clearly. Influence flowed upward. Loyalty flowed downward. And at the top, a small inner circle controlled access, information, and opportunity. It wasn't just networking. It was positioning. Members were encouraged to prove commitment, not through work, but through alignment. Agreeing with leadership, supporting decisions without question, prioritizing the group above outside relationships. That's where it changed, because now success wasn't based on talent. It was based on obedience. Some participants climbed quickly, others stalled without explanation, and those who questioned the structure found themselves slowly removed, Cut off, excluded, replaced. Not dramatically, quietly. That's what made it effective. Because nothing felt forced, everything felt earned. Until you realize the system wasn't built for growth, it was built for control. And by the time that becomes clear, you're already inside it. 8. The Sunset Strip Ascension. Nights, it always started late. After the visible nightlife faded, after the crowds, the noise, the distraction, that's when the real gatherings began. Private rooms, dim lighting, select guests. The concept was simple: ascend beyond limitation. At first, it felt like philosophy. Discussions about breaking boundaries, escaping identity, becoming something more than human expectation. But then the environment shifted. Music became repetitive, lighting became controlled, conversations became guided. And here's the key moment. Participants were encouraged to let go of lower thinking, doubt, fear, individual resistance. Those weren't obstacles anymore. And they were labeled as barriers. And once something is labeled a barrier, removing it feels like progress. That's how the system worked. Not through force, through reframing. One central figure led each session, never aggressive, never loud, but always directing the flow. And over time, guests stopped asking questions. Not because they were answered, but because they no longer felt necessary. Some described the nights as transformative. Others described something far more unsettling. That at some point, the experience stopped feeling like elevation and started feeling like surrender. 7. The Beverly Hills Enlightenment Dinners. It looked perfect. Elegant tables, soft lighting, influential guests, conversations that moved effortlessly between philosophy, success, and purpose. Everything felt elevated, refined, controlled. And that's what made it effective, because nothing about it felt extreme. At first, here's where the shift begins. The dinners followed a pattern, the same host, the same tone, the same progression, from light conversation into deeper discussion about truth, perception, and the illusion of independence. Guests were encouraged to share, then guided to rethink what they shared, slowly, carefully. The idea wasn't to challenge directly, it was to reshape perspective. And over time, certain guests became regulars, returning not for the food, not for the company, but for the clarity they believed they were gaining. That's when the structure revealed itself. Because the more someone attended, the less they questioned the direction of the conversation, and the more they relied on it. Some walked away inspired. Others walked away with a quiet realization that the environment wasn't just influencing ideas, it was replacing them. And when influence becomes subtle enough, you don't notice it happening. 6. The studio system loyalty circles. It didn't happen in public. It didn't need to. During Hollywood's most controlled era, influence wasn't always enforced through contracts. Sometimes it was reinforced through proximity, private gatherings, closed rooms, select attendees, actors, executives, rising talent, brought together under one unspoken expectation: alignment. Here's how it worked. Loyalty wasn't demanded directly, it was demonstrated. Who you agreed with, who you supported, who you didn't question. That's what determined your place. Because in a system built on image, control doesn't need to be loud, it needs to be consistent. And these gatherings made that consistency visible. Those who fit in moved forward. Those who didn't disappeared quietly. No confrontation, no explanation, just absence. That's what made it powerful, because nothing felt forced. It felt natural, like this was simply how things worked. But underneath that normalcy was something more structured, a system where belief, behavior, and opportunity were all connected. And once you understood that connection, you also understood something else. You weren't just part of the industry, you were part of something that shaped it. 5. The Hollywood New Age inner sanctum. It didn't advertise itself. You were invited, and that alone made it feel important. Small groups, carefully selected, gathered in quiet, controlled environments far removed from the noise of Hollywood. No cameras, no outsiders. Much just people who were told they were ready for something deeper. That's how it began. Here's where it shifts. The sessions followed a precise rhythm, guided meditation, repeated affirmations, controlled breathing. At first it felt calming, centering, almost therapeutic. Then the language changed. Participants weren't just exploring awareness anymore. They were being told they were part of something elevated, chosen, more aligned than others outside the room. And that idea changes everything. Because once someone believes they're chosen, they stop comparing, they stop questioning, they start committing. The group became tighter, more exclusive, more dependent on the same voices guiding every session. Some attendees describe clarity. Others describe something harder to explain, that over time, their thoughts felt less like their own and more like something shaped within the room itself. Because the deeper they went, the harder it became to separate personal truth from shared belief. And once that line disappears, so does independence. 4. The Celebrity Self-Mastery Seminars. It promised control, control over emotion, over fear, over failure. For actors constantly under pressure, that promise was impossible to ignore. High-end seminars began appearing, private, expensive, exclusive, attended by recognizable faces, rising talent, people desperate to gain an edge in an unforgiving industry. At first it worked. Confidence increased, focus sharpened. Participants felt stronger, clearer, more in control of themselves. But here's where it changes. The program didn't end, it deepened. New levels, new sessions, more intense exercises designed to break down limitations, mental, emotional, personal. And with each level, one thing became more consistent: dependence on the system itself. Because now improvement wasn't internal, it was guided, led by one central authority whose methods were no longer questioned, only followed. Participants began distancing themselves from outside influences, friends, opinions, even their own instincts, because doubt had been redefined, not as caution, but as weakness. Some achieved success, others walked away feeling something else entirely, that the system hadn't just improved them, it had rewritten how they saw themselves. And once that happens, leaving doesn't feel like freedom, it feels like loss. 3. The Hollywood Rebirth Workshops. It didn't begin with control, it began with release. The participants arrived expecting transformation, something powerful, something freeing. And at first, that's exactly what it felt like. They were told to let go of identity, of fear, of who they thought they were. And then it started. The breakdown, not physical, emotional. Layer by layer, they were pushed into vulnerability, personal stories exposed, defenses removed, reactions intensified, and slowly, something shifted. Here's the turning point. They weren't rebuilt right away. They stayed in that broken state, long enough to become open, long enough to accept anything that followed. That's when the new structure appeared. Beliefs introduced carefully, repeated, reinforced, not by force, but by the group itself. Because when everyone around you accepts something, it stops feeling optional. It starts feeling true. Some called it awakening. Others described something far more unsettling, that the version of themselves that walked out didn't feel discovered. It felt designed. And once you realize that, the question isn't what changed, it's who decided what you should become. 2. The elite visionary circles. You don't apply to it, you don't search for it. At some point, it finds you. The invitation feels subtle, casual, almost accidental. A conversation, a recommendation, a quiet introduction that leads to a room you didn't know existed. And once you're inside, everything feels elevated. The conversations are sharper. The ideas feel bigger. People speak as if they understand something others don't. At first, it's inspiring. Then it becomes defining. Here's where it shifts. Members aren't just encouraged to think differently. They're encouraged to see themselves differently, more aware, more capable, more aligned than everyone outside the circle. And that belief creates separation, not forced, accepted. Because once you believe you're operating at a higher level, you stop listening to anything below it. The group tightens, access narrows, influence concentrates, and slowly participation stops being optional. Because leaving isn't framed as freedom, it's framed as losing something valuable. That's what keeps people inside, not pressure, fear of exclusion. And by the time that fear becomes real, You're no longer deciding if you belong there. You're trying to make sure you never lose your place. 1. The executive circle gathering. It looks ordinary. That's why no one questions it. A private dinner, a quiet location, carefully selected guests with everything to gain and nothing to risk. No cameras, no recordings, no evidence. That's the design. At first, it feels like every other high-level Hollywood meeting, conversations about projects, deals forming between sentences, futures being shaped casually, almost invisibly. Then you notice something. The same people guide the room, not aggressively, not officially, but consistently, and everyone else adjusts around them. Here's the moment it changes. Agreement happens too easily. Not because everyone thinks the same, but because no one wants to challenge what's already been decided. And what's been decided always seems to come from the same place. That's when you understand. This isn't a discussion, it's alignment, because no one is told what to do. They don't have to be. When our opportunity makes the decision for them, access reinforces it, and silence protects it. Some leave thinking they were part of something powerful. Others leave realizing something else entirely, that nothing in that room was accidental. And what happens there doesn't stay there. It moves outward, into careers, into outcomes, into the version of Hollywood the world is allowed to see. And by the time you recognize the pattern, you're already inside it. Hollywood has always sold illusion. But behind the lights, some gatherings blurred the line between connection and control. What looked like parties often carried structure, influence, and something far harder to see from the outside. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. These weren't just moments of entertainment, but systems shaping belief, loyalty, and identity. And maybe the most unsettling truth isn't that they existed, it's how easily they blended in.